Hi everyone, and welcome back to the kickoff session of our fall series of Tuesday Times Roundtable, aka TTR. We're so glad to have you here today. Welcome. We are back fully in person. Tell your friends. I know we got a lot of questions this morning about whether or not Zoom still exists, but we're here, we're together, we're gathered, and hopefully these discussions really dig deep into how, where, and the ways that we exist together in this community. If you haven't already, make sure that you go ahead and sign in. The QR codes are posted around the room, and the sign will be open a little later, so don't feel like you're super rushed, but it's also up here on the screen. If you are a GLM student, make sure that you take a screenshot of the sign-in so that you can put that on your points log. My GLM students 100% make sure, and if you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about when I say GLM, I'm talking about the Excellence in Global Learning Medallion. Absolutely hang out and talk to our staff afterwards so that you can learn more if you want to get more involved. Speaking of, in our kickoff, we have lots of special guests with us today, so I want to make sure that we say hello. First and foremost, if you haven't already met Anna Prado, she is our Assistant Director in charge of student programs. Definitely hang out after and she will be here to talk more. Our program manager, Sherry, you probably saw it, there she is, Sherry Beeson. Sherry's in charge of what really brings the curriculum of global learning into the classroom, and what we're trying to bridge here in TTR is what we're learning in the class that Sherry is instrumental, fundamental in creating in all of those really great learning experiences. We have Melanie Perez, who is our graduate assistant in charge of social media. So if you're DMing us, and absolutely do, with any questions or anything that you're involved in on campus, we'd love to also promote. That's Melanie that you're talking to on the other side. And last but most definitely not least, we have Dr. Hilary Landorf, our executive director and founding director of Global Learning, Office of Global Learning Initiatives here at FIU. So we thank you guys for being here, and thank you all for supporting in all the things that we do. Awesome. Next. If you are a GLM student and you're looking for funding for projects that you're working on and you haven't checked your email this morning, we have officially launched as of today the next funding opportunities, the scholarships that are available for projects and engagement. They are the Bob Farrell Global Learning Scholarship and Sustainable Development and the Rupert Lynn Global Learning Scholarship. Each one of them has their own kind of niches that they're feeding into. So absolutely we encourage you to attend our GL at FIU info sessions for these two scholarship opportunities in particular. That's going to be on October 5th, at 1 p.m. It will be via Zoom. So if you haven't already, go ahead and email glmedal@fiu.edu so that you can find out how you can register to attend that and get some more information. Lastly, we know that Tuesday Times Roundtable is done in collaboration with the New York Times in Education. One thing that does for you is gives every FIU student with an @fiu.edu email a free digital subscription to the New York Times. So if you haven't already, you can go to accessnyt.com, use your FIU email address to register, and you get free digital subscription. Each and every TTR is inspired, informed by some New York Times article. You can read today's New York Times article at go.fiu.edu/TTR0913. That's today's date, always, TTR0913. Finally, today, we've got a really great session with some local activists and community groups that really get the youth and political engagement in our community. I'm sure you've seen them around campus doing voter registration guides, but today specifically we have Yanelis, who goes by she, her pronouns, is a Miami local proudly representing Hialeah, where she grew up and where most of her family still resides. She is passionate about social justice, racial equity, and elevating community self-determination by making civic participation accessible. She believes that collective action is essential in shaping the future all Miamians deserve. She first got involved with Engage Miami as a member in 2019, went on to join the inaugural class of YPP Fellows in 2020, Young People's Priority Project?
Young People's Policy Priorities.
Policy Priorities, Young People's Policy Priorities Fellows in 2020, and now leads issue advocacy work at the organization. She has a bachelor's degree in international affairs and communication from Florida State University. And she is joined by Monica Bustinza. who is a PhD candidate at the Department of Public Policy and Administration here at our very own Florida International University. Her research focuses on local policy implementation and citizen participation in the United States with an emphasis on election administration. She recently joined Engage Miami as a senior program manager of voter engagement, where she focuses on increasing voter youth engagement in South Florida. She also serves as a board member on the Voter Services Chair of the League of Women Voters in Miami-Dade County and a committee member of FIU's Voting and Civic Engagement Committee. Before beginning her graduate degree, Monica earned her Associate of Arts from Miami-Dade Honors College in 2015 and her Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Miami in 2017. She was awarded a master's degree in public administration en route to her doctorate. Welcome both. Thank you very much for being here, and I'll hand it over to Yanelis.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, or for having us. I'm going to stand for this, but how's everybody doing? Good. Glad to be here. Like Michelle said, my name is Yanelis Valdes, and I am with Engage Miami. And we're here to talk a little bit about organizing youth, specifically in a political sense, right? And I want to first share a little bit about Engage Miami and who we are. So our mission is to build a more just, democratic, and sustainable Miami. And we do that through building the power of young people through civic engagement and specifically voter registration, get out the vote efforts, and also issue-based organizing. So we are a membership-based organization, so we have many young people who really inform all of the work that we do and that we look to as leaders in our community to really uplift the issues that are affecting young people every day. And I actually want to start with posing a question for you all. I want you all to take a second and think about what you hope for the future of Miami. So imagine it's the year 2032 and your neighborhood and your city have changed for the better. We live in a more just, sustainable, and democratic community. What does that look like to you, and what do you see? So I'm going to give you all a second to really ponder this, and then I want to hear from a few folks about some of the things that you see in this future Miami.
I would love to get the ball rolling.
Sure.
Access to reliable public transportation.
Yep.
If you want to project this, probably easiest.
I was just going to say more affordable housing,
Yeah.
especially for college students.
Yep.
I would say less homelessness in the streets.
Yeah, go ahead.
More access.
Yeah, so more areas where you can actually go to vote. Yeah. Go ahead.
I would say quality education.
Yes. And what does all of that look like? If you were to walk outside of your home, what do you see around you? Yeah, I know I see parks, a lot of green spaces. I see a ton of bus stops and places where I can take the metro, right? I see that the metro comes to where I live, and it's actually easy to get in, very affordable. I see all my neighbors outside, get to talk to them. I see community gardens. I see community centers where you can access mental health services. That's what I see when I think of Better Miami. And I think of getting a text that says, voting is open, and going on a website and being able to vote easily, right? Not having to physically go somewhere because it's so much more accessible online, right? So those are some of the things that we're fighting for, right? And so I think some of this was mentioned by all of you, but voting rights is one of the things we're fighting for. Renter protections, clean water. That's so important, and we're seeing a crisis in our country around clean water. And in South Florida, we have to protect our bay in order to preserve our access to clean water. That's where most of our water comes from, is the Everglades. And we see so much development going into the Everglades, and it's really concerning, and what that could cause for us, especially when it comes to our drinking water, which is essential for us to be able to live. Like Michelle said, reliable public transit, access to mental health services, and affordable housing. So these are things we hear all the time from young people, so it's no surprise that a lot of this was mentioned here, right? We know these are really fundamental rights that we have and issues that we're all facing. It's so hot outside right now. We need more tree canopy. We need more stations where we can go to have some water, to cool down, shaded areas. We see how expensive housing is right now on so many levels, whether you're a college student or you're someone who's elderly, right? And so this is what we're fighting for, this future that we all really deserve, in which we can thrive, right? Because it's not just about having our essential needs met, which is really important, but also being able to thrive, being able to experience joy and be in community with folks. So how do we do that? We organize. So this is a cute little graphic that shows like what the potential is when we all come together for a common cause. And organizing really is about building long-term collective power to transform some of these conditions. And it's really about meeting your neighbors, knowing who is part of your community, and really talking about some of these issues and thinking about solutions that you all want to see in your neighborhoods, right? And really continuing to build relationships and bring more people into that fight. And we call that base building. So having a membership model, that means having a base of folks who are really committed to making these changes. And base building is the process of transforming these connections, these relationships, into power. And we talk a lot about power when we think about political organizing, when we think about shifting the conditions in which we live. So I want to hear from you all about moments when you have felt powerful and when you have felt powerless. Think about it for a little bit, and then I want to hear from a few folks.
So a moment I felt powerful was when I protest and finding a community of people that wanted the same things for me, for us, for everybody. That was really empowering for not only me, but to see themselves empowered as well.
Yeah, protests are definitely a place where you can feel the energy and feel that like fuel. Anybody else?
I could give an example. Oh, go ahead. No, please, go ahead.
Like, I think since my aunt has a lot of immigrants, when I came from Cuba, hard to move, so I tried to with public transportation, and I felt really powerful because it could take me to school. I didn't depend on anyone, but then every morning there was no security in those stations, so I was like harassed and everything, so I felt really powerless. And that's something that we can change in public transportation.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's tough, and it's, I think, also really motivating when you're in a space where you feel both powerless and powerful, and that I think gives you even more encouragement to want to shift things. So thank you for sharing.
Mine is something similar to hers in that it's one situation, both powerful and powerless. And it was when I was giving birth to my kids. I felt powerful because I was going through something, my body was going through something, and I was exerting life. But I also felt powerless because of the statistics around the death toll in women of color when they give birth. So it was that powerless feeling of, am I going to be another statistic as well?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think these are really great examples of moments in which if there was a systemic shift, we wouldn't feel powerless, right? When it comes to the situation with transit, when it comes to the healthcare that we receive, right? We can change these things. These aren't static, right? And there are a few folks in power who make these decisions and who have the power to make those changes. But we also have a lot of power as people. And so we define power as the ability to implement the decisions that you make, right? And Reverend Martin Luther King said, the ability to achieve purpose, right? So if we have a really clear idea of what we want to see in our communities, coming together and having a collective voice and going out to government meetings and going to protest and speaking with elected officials, calling them, and just showing that we're going to continue to show up and be there and really holding folks accountable for making decisions that are rooted in community and in our well-being, it's possible. So that's what we're all about, just showing people that there is possibility. Even when things feel really difficult and really impossible, it's never impossible to shift these conditions. There's just so many avenues and so many parts we can play as community members and as people that just really care about our future and making sure that we are cared for. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've done at Engage Miami, because we're a young organization, so everybody who is part of Engage is relatively young. We're all learning together, and that's the beauty of being in this space and being with other young people, because no idea is shot down. We want to make sure that we're talking about what some of these solutions are and trying them out and experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't, and that's what we've been doing with members for a long time. And so we're really proud of some of the things we've done, like registering 25,000 voters. Sometimes electoral politics can feel really impossible, really discouraging. And we have to remember that it's just one small puzzle piece in creating some of these conditions that we're talking about, right? We need to have folks who represent us in power that are going to uplift some of these policy solutions that we want to see, right? And so if everybody who is in an elected position doesn't feel representative of us, we go to the ballot box and we vote for the person that we believe is gonna properly represent us, right? And so it's not the only way, but it is a critical part of having conditions in which we can organize to create change. And so we're really proud of registering over 25,000 young voters. We won early voting sites on campuses in 2018. So this is a really great example of how organizing can be really effective. So some early voting sites had been added on campuses and was part of our county budget in 2018. And we'd been on Miami-Dade North Campus organizing folks and registering folks to vote. And a lot of them were expressing how difficult it was to take time off of work and off of school to go vote. A lot of folks that go to Miami-Dade are commuter students, working class, who have 1 to 2 jobs and are taking classes and have really, really busy schedules. Many have families, right? And so we advocated to get early voting sites added to the North Campus and to the Kendall Campus, and we won. We showed up with a bunch of students to the budget hearings. We told them why this was important. We gave them the statistics about how many students were on these campuses, and people shared their testimony of how difficult it was to step away to go vote. And so we're really proud that we won that. And that doesn't mean it's going to be in every budget every year. So we also have to continuously be engaged to make sure that the things that we ask for and we do win remain in our policies, in our budgets. And we always say that the county budget, the city budget, those are really powerful documents that really highlight the priorities that we have as a community, that our government is uplifting, right? Because if there's no money or resources going towards a particular service, that's not a priority, right? So we look to the county budget, to the city budget, to really see what it is that our local government is invested in. And like Michelle mentioned too, we put together the Young People's Policy Priorities, which is a platform that we have that is like our North Star. It's what we're rooted in when it comes to organizing, and that is affordable housing, specifically thinking of tenants and renters and protections for them, and being able to shift away from the influence of developers in the county. Public transit, and we call that transit that works, that's efficient, that's on time, and expanding the infrastructure for that. safe communities that really looks beyond police and prisons and thinks about the community services that people need to really be safe. Climate action, like I said, protecting our bay, the Everglades, and democracy done right, which to us is all about having access to participation in our local government, but also having actual policies that protect us from government corruption, from voting rights violations, which we actually will talk a little bit more about. But that's what we really use to lead the work that we're doing when it comes to community organizing. I want to ask a final question for you all as this part before I move it over to Monica. How has a decision by any level of government impacted you, and how did that make you feel? Go ahead.
They moved the location for polling by my house, so it's no longer the school that's in front. I have to actually now drive to get there. And it was pretty upsetting, not more so for me, but for the people that I know that don't have transportation, and it was so easy for them just to walk from my neighborhood to the school. Now they have to either not vote or have to do other source or other means to be able to go and vote.
Anybody else want to share?
So in 2020, I was like in 12th grade in my high school, and we had an important exam to do because in Haiti, the Ministry of Education, I mean, to have your high school degree, you need to pass that exam. And because of what was happening in the country, they postponed the exam to like 2 months from the initial date, and this impacted me a lot because I was already accepted here at FIU, so I had to move my studies to like spring 2020 instead of, I mean, semester that I really wanted to go in, but I'm here. But it made me feel, at that moment, it really made me feel powerless because I couldn't do anything about that decision.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. We're glad you're here. All right, I think I'm gonna pass it over to Monica to talk more about voting rights here in Florida.
Definitely. Well, thank you. Well, is everyone okay if I sit? Is that okay? Yeah? Awesome. Makes it more comfortable for me, to be honest. Before we jump into the article itself, how many of you know how elections are administered in the United States? So basically, like what you read, you don't question it. Anyone know? No? Not really? No? Well, Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution grants states the responsibility of overseeing elections, right? So where do these election laws come from? Well, in terms of constitutional amendments and federal election laws, there are passed that determine voter eligibility and protection of the franchise. So for example, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the National Voter Registration Act. So for example, must be a citizen, that's eligibility. Turn 18 before election day, also eligibility. And then prohibiting voter discrimination based on race, color, membership in a language minority group, that's obviously protection. So election administration in the United States is inherently decentralized, meaning that there are more than 10,000 local election officials that administer elections at the local level. In the state of Florida, we have 67 supervisors of elections, one for every county. However, that may look a little different depending on where you live. How many of you are registered to vote in another state, for example? No? So for those of you that are eligible to vote in the state of Florida, you're a registered voter here. Gotcha. Perfect. So state laws and constitutions delegate and defer the responsibility of election administration to these localities, and oftentimes they're the ones that make decisions, and there's even variations within states. For example, if you're a registered voter in Broward, voting may look a little different than somebody in Miami-Dade County, just to give you an example. So there's many variations across the country regarding election administration. So what did you all read in the article itself? Tell me a little bit, how did it make you feel? Do you follow what's going on in the state legislature regarding election and voting rights?
Very many of them got to read it before today, which is tough. But if there's like general opinions on those ideas, now is definitely the time to share.
Yeah, and we put out an excerpt of the article, something that we thought was like a hard-hitting point. So if you want to take a second to read this and then maybe share, like, what do you feel? What's your reaction to this news?
Essentially.
Making it so that I can't stand early vote for someone who works and is not available on Tuesdays. Definitely feels intentional, and that's what I got from the article.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. It's the sad realities, but I'm happy that we're having this conversation because it's just so important. Oftentimes people don't know what's happening in our legislature in Tallahassee. Every legislative session, something changes regarding elections, and I'll speak more about that. But anyone else want to share their sentiments regarding the excerpts that were posted up?
It's so much happening, and it strikes me that we're talking about like the judge that's the elected official in doing that, and then like the legislature as a whole, and the amount of work that goes into on both sides, right? Planning for putting in that kind of language and dismantling that kind of language from being done. The amount of work from the community that kind of disappears in the like snippet, right? Strikes me.
Yeah. I would say the light at the end of the tunnel is organizations like Engage Miami, like the League of Women Voters, like the ACLU, like et cetera, because those are the ones that, you know, go and lobby on behalf of the rights of those, you know, that are being disenfranchised, unfortunately, by the laws that are being, you know, enacted in reality. But I just want to briefly discuss, you know, some of the modern day, often known as like colorblind policies that are implemented in terms of voting in the state of Florida in particular, just so you all are aware of what we're battling as eligible voters in the state of Florida. So for those of you that are eligible to vote and who are just curious about the voting process in Florida. So in order to register to vote in the state of Florida, you must register to vote 29 days before the election. Whereas some states have same-day voter registration. Some states have automatic voter registration. So we have one barrier right there, 29 days before election day. So by the way, just so you know, October 11th is the last day to register to vote in the state of Florida. If you do not make it by that day, you're not voting, unfortunately. That's what that 29-day cutoff date basically is.
Yeah, and if you're not registered to vote and you are interested, you can come see us after this conversation. We can help you get registered.
Yeah, so one of the things that Engage Miami does is register voters, so we're happy to help and assist you with that. We've been partnering with the Freer Institute, and I do see a fellow here. And yes, we are hosting a voter registration drive, actually even today, tomorrow, and Thursday. So we're out there in the Breezeway or in the GC, this building. But yeah, so we've got, book closing deadlines. We also have variations to early voting. I'm not sure if any of you have seen the calendar for early voting, but it's like week 1 is from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. The weekend is 8 to 2 p.m. So these variations create confusions, not only for those that are interested in, voting early, but also those that just don't have access to that kind of information. Another one is unpaid postage fees for vote by mail. If you're a registered voter in Miami-Dade County, they do provide a paid postage fee. But in other counties in the state, they do not pay for vote by mail paid postage. In addition to that, we have strict identification requirements, as you already mentioned. That ID has to have a signature, your picture, or whatever it may be. If you don't have it, you could provide one or the other or cast a provisional ballot, which opens up a can of worms, and we won't get into those details. There's also language access. At least in Miami-Dade County, we do provide our ballots in 3 languages, Spanish, English, and Creole. But in other counties, they don't provide that. So additional barriers that we have to encounter, unfortunately. So I'm just going to throw, 3, Senate bills that are very popular and are actually spoken about in the New York Times article itself. So any of you have heard of Senate Bill 90? Nope. So that was in 2021. And there's Senate Bill 524, which was 2022, last legislative session. So sorry, but here are more limitations to voting thanks to these Senate bills that were passed within the last 2 years. But the positive side is the League was out there, the ACLU was out there, there was different organizations that were out there lobbying on our behalf, but I'm just going to read them. So because of Senate Bill 90, we have limitations on where, when, how drop boxes can be used. And by the way, the name of drop boxes changed to secure ballot intake stations. So don't say ballot drop box. So basically now there's limitations. You cannot just drop off your vote by mail ballot, your mail-in ballot at any location at any time. It has to be within early voting during the hours of operations, which, by the way, I did discuss those variations, right? Okay. Then there's also at the elections department, but they close at 5. What happens to folks that work at night? Get out at 5. Sorry. Barriers, but we're here, we're together, we're speaking about it, and we are the future. And November is coming up, and if you're eligible to vote or if you're not, I hope that you encourage your loved ones, your friends to vote, because democracy is on the ballot. The folks that are crafting this legislation, they're on the ballot. So just wanted to give a heads up there. At least there's also been changes in requesting a vote by mail ballot. Back in the day, you would get a ballot every election cycle. Now you have to request one each time. Once again, barriers. Regarding Senate Bill 524, now we have a special police task force that are enforcing and overseeing cases on voter fraud, which, if you know very well, voter fraud is like 0.0001%. But now we have that. There's also new fines and restrictions on third-party voter registration organization, also referred to as 3PVROs. Engage Miami is a 3PVRO. So now, whenever we're registering voters to vote, we have to disclose that we're a third-party voter registration. We also need to let them know that we may not return their we may not return their voter registration form, and also we get fined for any issues with the voter registration form. And as I mentioned, more barriers to voting regarding, as I didn't catch your name, I'm so sorry, regarding the closure of polling places. So unfortunately, because as I mentioned earlier, our election system is heavily decentralized, the cost of providing access to the ballot box comes from the county, and sometimes counties just don't have the financial infrastructure to have more polling locations, or they don't have access to as many polling locations. So what do they have to do? Close them down. So instead of pointing fingers at the SOE's office, Supervisor of Elections, we gotta vote those people out because they're not giving the money that we need in order to have, direct access to the ballot box. But before I wrap up my spiel, I want to share just a few election-related races. Can we move that? Yeah. So I already discussed that. But yeah, we can leave it on that side. Thank you. So what's going to be on the ballot in November? Just to give you a heads up, does anybody live in Aventura, Bal Harbor, Biscayne Park, Cutler Bay, Doral, Hialeah, Key Biscayne, Medellin, Miami, Sunny Isles, Opa-locka? Any of you live there? Yeah? Well, keep a lookout on your sample ballot because democracy is in your hands locally, okay? At the state level, we'll be voting for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, chief financial officer, commissioner of agriculture, state senators, state representatives. Our governor, who appoints our secretary of state? Him. If you're familiar with anything, I don't mean to be an academic, but principal agent theory. You have somebody that is appointing somebody, and obviously they act on the behalf of the person that appointed them to office. That our Secretary of State serves as the chief election official. Everything is connected, just so you know. Once again, democracy is in our hands. And at the federal level, we have a U.S. Senator seat open, one of 2 seats, along with the U.S. Representatives. Yes, this may seem overwhelming, but I have hope for you. You can count on organizations like Engage Miami, League of Women Voters, Catalyst. There are so many local organizations that provide you all with nonpartisan information regarding the upcoming election. So I hope that you enjoyed our talk. You learned something about, our election system in the U.S., in Florida, what types of restrictions we, encounter, and there are just so many ways to get involved. And I'll pass it on to Yanelis so she could wrap up the conversation and final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. And before we do wrap up, I'm coming back to the slide around some of the barriers to voting in Florida. I do want to give folks the opportunity to ask any questions or comment on anything that Monica just shared around voting rights here in Florida and how specifically our state legislator enacts a lot of these policies. So I just wanted to give a moment in case folks had any thoughts they wanted to share or have any questions. Yeah, that's a great question. So we put out voter guides every year, every election year, and we're working to actually have those translated into Spanish and Haitian Creole this year. So look out for those. I think they'll be out in the next month before the election, so sometime in October. So follow us and we'll be posting all about it. Monica, do you know of any other?
Yeah, there's also other organizations, and I'm sorry for mentioning the League. It's just I'm a proud board member, but we also have a nonpartisan voter guide. It's not as cool as Engage Miami's, not gonna lie, but we do post it in English and Spanish. And then there's also other organizations out there like Voto Latino. They are constantly, speaking about barriers to quality, trusted information regarding upcoming elections. So I would definitely circle back on organizations like those, along with if you want a more local lens, stick to Engage or the League, because we focus more on those local issues. And in addition to even language, there's also issues regarding the disability community and access to the ballot box. So there's many organizations out there, such as Access the Vote. They have so many resources as well.
Yeah, and I'll also mention that it's a really important question because I think that's something we struggle with, right? There's not enough information in other languages to even understand where some of the candidates stand on certain issues, or if there is like a referendum or an amendment on the ballot. Those are really difficult to understand as is. So the fact that there's not enough coverage, even like when we look at media coverage when it comes to other languages, it's really tough. And then there's also the issue of misinformation. That's something that we think a lot about, and we are trying to figure out ways to really combat that. And we know that in Spanish language spaces, that is a big issue when it comes to elections and just like local government in general. So we're thinking a lot about that, and unfortunately there aren't as many resources as there should be in order to make sure we're providing language access as a community and also fighting some of this misinformation that's really making its ways to our communities.
Yeah, but I would say Engage Miami locally though, the information, if you really are interested in knowing more about these local races or even state races, you know, as Yanni mentioned, English, Spanish, at the very least.
I would love to hear a little about, like, as an organization, how do you approach putting together that guide, right? So, like, how do you, like, what are the guiding principles? What are the things that you consider as you do that? So if as per example, if I was a student and I want to get information out there about sustainability or women's rights, or if I have a project that I want to spread information about, what should we be thinking about in putting that kind of guide or information together?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So what we do is we use the Young People's Policy Priorities, our platform, to inform what questions we want to ask candidates. So one of the things we always include is just basic information. When is election day? When is early voting? Where are those early voting sites where you can get registered to vote? So just, you know, some of those more basic resources. And then we typically cover our county commission and the school board, so those local offices, and then our federal offices, some of the races that Monica mentioned, as well as the state. And depending on what election is happening, right? Because there are so many elections happening every year, even when we're not hearing about it as much. So for example, in August, we had our local elections. So there was also the primaries, but one of the really important areas and races we were looking at were the local elections, right? So our county commission and our school board, a lot of them got decided in August, right? So we focused on that. We asked every candidate for every district questions about climate, questions about transit, questions about housing. And then we published their exact responses. And we also published who didn't respond to us, so folks know. We reached out, so we sent emails, we make calls. It is a pretty intensive effort to put together the voter guides, but we try to really provide as much information as possible. And if there is any referendums or amendments, we try to really expand on those and what the impacts of them are so that people can make an informed decision when they go into the polls. One of the things that was on the ballot in August were judges, and that's really difficult to find information about. There's not a lot of stuff that's published. So we're really figuring out like what is the best way to package information and in a way that is digestible, and also that we have capacity for, because we are a small organization. So we definitely encourage folks to do some of this research and put out their own guides. I think those are always really great to see in the community when folks put together their own perspective on some of these races. So
yeah, and I would also add, you know, regarding the August primary itself, you know, we always go into elections saying Florida is a closed primary state, right? And people get confused that doesn't matter at the local level when it's a, you know, nonpartisan race. So that's why guides like these, like the one that Engage Miami, are just so important, is because people don't know what they're going to be voting for. And if they don't have a badge of honor of a D or an R, they're like, I can't vote. It's a closed primary. No, 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 no. Please correct your friends. There was things to vote on in August. It was our judges. It was circuit as well. It was county judges, circuit judges. It was school board. It was, a plethora of races, commissioners that impact our daily lives. And turnout was 19.45% in Miami-Dade County, I believe. Don't quote me, but it was roughly around that. Meaning the population of this school perhaps determines the election.
Yeah, and there are races that in previous years have been determined by 30 votes. I know often people feel like my vote doesn't count, and that is something that is, I think, repeated a lot, especially when we think about presidential elections. But there are local elections that get decided by almost nothing, where you can organize your apartment building to vote, and that'll make a huge difference in a particular race. So I also wanted to mention that.
And I also wanted to add, because Yanni spoke about the whole 2018 mobilization of college students across Florida, actually, in order to ensure that there's early voting sites on college campuses. FIU is an early voting site, FYI. So please take advantage of early voting during, for the upcoming election, please. If not, they're going to close them down. Same thing at Miami-Dade College. They still have North and Kendall as well. So be mindful. And yeah, I think you had a question.
Yeah, so I'm an international student.
Yeah.
Therefore, I don't have the right to vote in America.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, what can I do or how can I help to make a change in democracy?
That's a great question.
Well, you're here. Well, number one, you're here. You're asking these questions. You're engaged. But I'll let Yanni.
Yeah, so there are many ways that you can get involved. I always recommend joining an organization just because individually there are things we can do, but also there's so much inaccessible information that organizations are working hard to really share with folks and really make digestible and be able to put out, right? And so when you are with an organization, you have a resource that you can go to, you can ask any questions that you have. So of course, Engage Miami is an organization you can join and become a member of. But there are other orgs like the League of Women Voters. There is a Miami chapter of the ACLU. If there's a particular issue that you're really interested in, right? For example, transit, there's a Transit Alliance. So there's a number of organizations that you can get connected to and will help actually bring those opportunities to you directly. But you still live here, right? So you are still represented by someone. So I always recommend that people look up who their county commissioners are and who their state representatives are based on where you live, and have that in mind. And when you are hearing about policy that's being brought forward, which organizations can help really connect you to, I think that's one of the key things, right? It's really difficult to follow what's happening at the county commission. It's really difficult to follow what's happening in state legislation. So organizations are doing that work and can really connect you and let you know, hey, they're voting on this particular policy. And that's your chance to call, email those folks who are making those decisions and show up to county meetings, to state meetings. Another thing is educating your family and your neighbors about this, and helping other folks register to vote that are eligible. So voting is not the only thing that we can do. So we always want to share ways that folks can get involved. So thanks for asking. And we do have a QR code up here that you can sign up to get more information about Engage Miami if you're interested. We always reach out to folks, have a quick call conversation so you all can learn a little bit more about what we do. Yeah, so for example, right now we're organizing around the county budget. So the first hearing was last week, and right now they are debating whether or not to cut property taxes. So a lot of folks in the community have asked for cuts in property taxes because property value has really gone up. So in the proposed budget, which is put together by the mayor, it cuts the property taxes by 1% and provides a lot of increased services for things like the Office of Housing Advocacy, which helps renters, and for emergency rental assistance, and a number of other really great services. If the property taxes are further cut, that can really jeopardize a lot of these county services. And so there's a balance that needs to happen with helping bring relief to homeowners, but also to bring relief to renters and to the working class. And so there's a debate about whether or not to continue to cut these taxes, and we're asking for the county commission to not further cut because there is already relief being provided and there's other resources that exist. And so that's an example. We're showing up to the budget hearings, we're letting them know why these county services are so important and asking them to keep what they call the millage rate as is and not further cut property taxes. So if y'all are interested, the next county hearing is next Tuesday, so September 20th at 5 p.m. And it's at Government Center, which is in downtown, which can be really difficult too. It's at a time that people are still getting out of work or in classes, and that is inaccessible for folks to drive to. There's barely parking in that area, so we recognize that, and that's something that we're also having conversations with the folks who are in power to decide whether or not they're online, because in 2020 we saw these hearings happen online and hundreds of people were able to attend and they went back to in-person fully. So we know it's possible to make these changes, make things more accessible. So invite y'all to come, and if you fill this out, we can be in touch and share some more information. And we are also gonna have a member meeting on next Thursday, September 22nd, and we're actually gonna be talking about the state of education in Florida specifically. There's a lot that's happened locally and at the state level when it comes to like our school board, when it comes to our curriculum. So definitely invite you all to participate in Thursday's meeting next week to talk about what you can do, and we'll be tying that back to the elections because, like Monica said, a lot of the folks who have passed policies that we believe are very harmful to our students are on the ballot, right? So it's not just democracy that's on the ballot, it's education, it's housing, it's transit. So definitely invite you all to be in community with us at Engage.
Yeah, and just a shameless plug, I guess. Next Tuesday, also on that day, is National Voter Registration Day, and we'll be celebrating 10 years of National Voter Registration Act. So actually, Engage Miami is partnering with the Freer Institute to have an event hosted here on campus on that day. I believe it's from 11 to 3, and our supervisor of elections will be present. So if you want to know who is the face behind our elections department, she'll be here, Supervisor White. And follow, Engage Miami on social media, follow the Freer Institute. So much information is, going to be posted regarding our upcoming civic holidays and ways to get involved during the election cycle.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that Kendall Campus and North Campus were available for early voting. Is that something that you have to fight for every time for the budget?
Yeah, so it depends, right? So if it's written into the budget, that's good. That's good news, but that is something we're always looking at to make sure it's included. So there's not an ordinance that codifies these early voting sites, right? It's whether or not there's funding that's allocated for it. So there are things in our budget that are codified, like the homeless trust, for example, is a unit of the county that always gets funding. How much funding is the question, but there's a lot that's not codified, and so if they just remove funding, there's not any implications for that in terms of what the county is responsible or required to do. So yeah, early voting sites are some of those that they can be removed from the budget if they wanted to. Right now we're good though, so.
Yeah, right now there's a total of 28 early voting sites. And for those of you that are not familiar with early voting in Miami-Dade County, if you're a registered voter in Miami-Dade County, during that early voting period, you can vote at any early voting site. It's not like Election Day, that it's at the precinct level, which unfortunately you had to deal with a closure. But yeah, so during early voting, take advantage of that. You can vote on campus before class to get that, your civic duty, not out of the way, but just
Done. Yeah, get your sticker. And we have the dates here. So early voting starts on October 24th and goes through November 6th, which can be confusing too, because then there's November 7th, one day between early voting, where sometimes people think that sites are open, and it's very confusing. So just note that October 24th through November 6th, you can vote in any of the early voting locations like Monica mentioned. On November 8th, you can only vote in your designated precinct.
Yep. And if you have a vote by mail ballot that you haven't turned in, my recommendation on election day is to either surrender your ballot and vote in person at your designated polling location. Because if you still have your mail-in ballot in your hand and election day is the day before, or the day after, your vote's not going to be counted. Yeah. If it's not in the supervisor of elections' hands by 7 p.m., it doesn't even matter if it's postmarked. It won't get counted. Yeah.
I have a question, and it's about everything that you have been talking about, and what is a successful strategy you have used to reach out people in the community? Because they're like the students, you do things in school, like maybe people in their workspace, but like in general, like here in Miami, what have been your best strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something we are constantly thinking about. So we do some canvassing, so like door knocking in different neighborhoods. For example, in 2019, I think it was, in Little Haiti, in the city of Miami, there was a big development that was proposed to be built in the middle of Little Haiti that was going to be 30-something stories, which is very different than what exists in Little Haiti. There's a lot of single-family homes. There's not as much density, and people were really upset by that decision. And Engage Miami, because one of our organizers is from Little Haiti, was also really riled up about this, and helped plan some protests and rallies, and a lot of folks came out to that, and that was a point in time where we can really connect with folks about an issue that really fueled their interest in being more involved. And we also did community canvassing, which was knocking on doors in Little Haiti, being at the Little Haiti Cultural Center, talking to folks that are there and sharing what's going on. We do phone banks as well, so we call folks in the community to do what we call issue IDs, so asking them what issues that they really care about and whether or not they want to be involved in some of the upcoming events that we have, or even just about a particular issue. And so we try to do different types of outreach. We're also on social media and reach out to people that way, but it's difficult. It's really hard to be in the community and build with people that are constantly coming back and able to really dedicate time, because people are doing this for free, right? People are doing this, they're volunteering their time and energy, and it's tough work. So yeah, if you have any suggestions, we would love to hear. We're always talking with our members about that in particular. We try to go to like Wynwood too, for example, and like be in places where young people are at. But it's hard too as things continue to gentrify, right? And it's more folks who are from out of town that are coming to those spaces.
Yeah. I also think that something has to directly affect you in order for you want to get involved, right? So that links directly to the issue-based organizing. Yeah. That's, for me it was elections, right? I'm even to the extent of pursuing a PhD that just focuses on elections, right? So I think it's just finding that one thing that, really motivates you, aggravates you, that you're like, this is not fair, and that's where issue organizing comes to place. But yeah, thank you so much.
No, thank you. So it's 1:30. I just want to make sure to respect everyone's time, but I want to thank you guys again for bringing so much of your passion and knowledge and everything that you've experienced in organizing in Miami to our students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
So it's 1:30. The conversation continues. We'll hang out. So if you want to stick around, but I do want to respect your time. If you've got class and you scheduled us in between, if there's anything left over outside, please feel free to go ahead and take. And if you haven't already, make sure that you scan the QR code so that you can sign in. If you're here for GLM credit or class credit or whatever it is, right? I need to capture that sign in to be able to get that. So thank you very much. And we will see you guys maybe next Tuesday